Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We turn now to an amazing little poem, 195, For This Accepted Breath. This is a fascinating poem about poetry. Many have called this Emily's very powerful statement about poetry and poetics, where she'll ask some important questions about the source of inspiration in the light. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've as well read the preceding 194 poems. We just finished with 194 on this long storm. Now, Emily, in this poem, is going to ask about the source of inspiration, the longevity of inspiration. She's going to ask what a poet is good for. And I think this was significant in her own life because of her love of poets like Longfellow and Poe. What makes a poet? So, for example, what's the difference between writing a poem and being a poet? In the same way, what's the difference between playing the piano and being a pianist? We have a fundamental difference in regards to quality, to go back to our study of Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, for example, as a kind of quasi-random title, but not so quasi when you think about this poem. Namely, what is it that makes great stuff great stuff? And I think Emily is very much playing around with this. I also think that standing behind this poem has something to do with two biblical references. One of them is the Genesis 25 story of the Jacob and Esau account and the robbing of the birthright. Jacob will take from Esau his birthright through, of course, fooling the father. In the same way, I think Emily forever thought of herself as somehow trying to gain that poetic status. And she, of course, never would do it through publishing and that kind of thing, because Sam Boyles and other influential people in her life didn't allow it to happen or didn't facilitate it to happen. Maybe she didn't want it to happen. We'll obviously have that debate all the way through our study of a number of the poems about publishing. The other is a religious verse from the book of Revelation, a Christian religious verse from the book of Revelation that I think is as well highly significant, because we're going to get to the word crown in this poem. At Revelation 2:10, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. This notion of the crown, listen to all the royalty language of this poem. For this accepted breath, through it compete with death. The fellow cannot touch this crown, by it my title take. Ah, what a royal sake to my necessity stoop down. No wilderness can be where this attendeth me. No desert new, no fear of frost to come haunt the perennial bloom, but certain June. Get Gabriel to tell the royal syllable. Get saints with new unsteady tongue to say what tranks below most like their glory show fittest the crown. Now, poets love this poem, and rightfully so. Emily, of course, is making the argument that Shelley will have made in defense of poetry, Percy Bysshe Shelley, that poets bring that, what did he call it, potable gold? We've talked about this at LearnStrong.net. The power of a poet. But at the same time, the challenge of being a poet. Am I a poet, or do I just write lines? Am I ever going to be accepted as a poet? We know that so many great poets wondered this very thing. Of course, we've commented on Walt Whitman in our study of Talks with Walt at LearnStrong.net, where we did every poem of Lisa Grass. And again, he came back to it, even in his final lines, in his fancy final lines, right? Notice, she'll begin with for this. And again, it's not really clear what the this is. Maybe we're talking here about the production of her poetry, the inspiration of her poetry. Some have said, no, this is really more about Sam Boyles and Sam Boyles' feelings and her feelings for him. I like to read this poem, though, more from the perspective of the muse, the poetic notion of the muse that she obviously learned from her study of Greek renderings of how the poet plays that intermediary between the gods and humans, inspired to breathe. God breathed. For this accepted breath, to talk about breathed, right? In other words, the inspiration, the poetic inspiration. A way of saying this might be, for this I accepted breath. Through it, I compete with death. In other words, it's the whole notion of fame. You'll remember that Keats had on his own tombstone written, "Here lies one whose name was written water." Why? Because he worried that fame would be for him. What is it that he says? "When I have fears that I may cease to be, that on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink." Yeah, some poets, I would say all poets, have this challenge of, will what I'm doing now matter after I'm gone? Well, notice here it's compete with death. "The fellow cannot touch this crown." Now, crown is used in 24 poems. And crown is, of course, the last word of this poem. I think that Emily is playing a near blasphemous game, because readers of her poem, who were Christian enthusiasts, would know she's referencing Revelation 2:10, as we quoted it, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life." That's why the word "this," in my estimation, is central to this entire poem. Notice the accepted breath of poetic inspiration, which can compete with death and allows for this crown, not that crown. The fellow, whoever that is, maybe Sam Boyles, cannot touch this crown. In other words, I am going to gain my crown before I die. By it, the antecedent, of course, here is possibly, again, the poetic inspiration. "My title I take." She doesn't say I. "My title I take." Of course, this is what title? Well, the title of poet. And then this use of "ah." I've already commented on this. If you've been reading all the previous poems, you can immediately go, "Oh yeah, I remember when she does this "ah" thing." It's as if she is playing the game of perhaps. And you'll remember in 696 when we're getting there, acres of perhaps. "Ah, what a royal sake to my necessity stooped down." Now, this notion of stooping takes us back to the idea of accepted breath. In other words, this is her rendering, I believe, of that notion that the gods live here. They inspire. Remember, the invocation of the muse happens in our study of all those epics that we studied at learnstrong.net. The Iliad, the Odyssey, right? "Sing, O goddess, the rage of Achilles." That calling for the muse, right? Of course, Milton plays the same game in Paradise Lost. Notice, "to my necessity stoop down." It is interesting, she calls it a necessity. For Emily, poetics is life. It is breath. And of course, any artist who takes seriously their art will say, no, it's necessary. It's like breathing. To not paint, to not sculpt, to not write, to not play music would be like to not breathe. Can't do it. Notice, "no wilderness can be where this attendeth me." It's an amazing idea. No desert, no. All I need is my poetic inspiration, and I'm fine. No fear. Notice the repetition of "no" here in the anaphora. "No fear of frost to come." Whoa, what are we talking about to come? Obviously, that's that Crown of Life project afterwards. "Haunt," it's a key word, I think, in this poem, "the perennial bloom." You'll remember perennial from poem 84, right? "But certain Jew." Now, to me, this is the key word again. Certain. Just like this crown. Certain. In other words, as long as I know I've got this, I don't even have to worry about afterlife. I don't even have to worry about fame. I've got this, and that means there's no wilderness. That means there's no desert. Then, "to gets." Get Gabriel. In 6 more poems, Gabriel will be referenced, of course, the angel. "To tell the royal syllable." You'll remember syllable from poem 194, just before. Of course, this is the second use of royal, right? Along with crown. "Get saints," those who have lived that life that deserve that crown of life, "with new," but it's unsteady tongue to say, "what trance below." Now this may be, of course, the trance of poetic inspiration or trance of poetry. "What trance below most like their glory show, fittest the crown." Now, when we get to poem 569, we'll come back to this set of lines. This, many say, is Emily's greatest single poem about poetry. I reckon, when I count it all, first poets, then the sun, then summer, then the heaven of God, and then the list is done. But looking back, the first so seems to comprehend the whole. The others look a needless show. So I write, poets all. Their summer lasts a solid year. They can afford a sun the east would deem extravagant, and if the further heaven be beautiful as they prepare, for those who worship them, it is too difficult a grace to justify dream. She could have, of course, said the crown. Now, to finish at 2a, what is she really arguing here? Well, I think she's arguing that poets are the glory, the royal, the crown, and they are deserving of the crown. At 2b, well, the royal language here is remarkable. At 3a, do you guys remember when we studied our Horace and the Odes at 3:30, that notion that somehow, through art, the poets outdo death? It's a fascinating idea. Finally, at 3b, what do you think about an idea like this? Like, where do you think poetic inspiration comes from? Artistic inspiration comes from? And if you have it, is it true? There is no wilderness that will haunt us. I hope Emily is challenging you as an artist. Thank you.